By 7:30, the air over Mercer Island already felt like warm cotton pressed to my skin. I parked my dented sedan behind the service gate, smoothed my thrift store blouse, and reminded myself I could not afford pride today. A security guard made me wait while he checked a clipboard twice, like my name had changed overnight. When he finally waved me in, the estate manager's tight smile told me I was already guilty of something. I swallowed it and walked in, quiet and small. Long sleeves were my armor, even in July. I kept the cuffs buttoned to my wrists as I crossed marble that cost more than my car, nodding at people who looked through me. Most staff did. It made their lives easier. Eileen Brooks didn't. The housekeeper had soft hands and sharp eyes, and she always found a way to leave a mug of coffee where I'd see it, like a private reminder that I was human in this place. I needed it more than ever. Leo Vale was already awake, barefoot on the kitchen stool, dark curls sticking up like he'd fought sleep and won. My Harper slid beside him with the confidence of a girl who'd learned to adapt fast. She was 6, but she carried her backpack like a shield and her smile like a gift she chose to offer. Leo showed her his dinosaur stickers, and Harper gasped on purpose, making him glow as if he'd built the world. For a minute, it felt like home today. That was my job here. Keep the children safe, keep myself unseen. I learned which doors clicked too loudly, which hallways carried echoes, which cameras turned slightly when you passed. I kept my phone on silent, Harper's emergency contact on speed dial, and my voice low enough to disappear into air vents. Damian Vale moved through the house like gravity. I rarely saw him up close, but I felt him rooms tightening, conversations shortening, everyone aligning without being told. It felt like storm with no warning. Before we even started our morning, the estate manager cornered me near the pantry, eyes flicking to Harper's sneakers. The agency had cleared her visits, but the manager acted like my daughter was a stain on the countertops. I understood the subtext. Single moms were messy, complicated, risky. I apologized in the way I'd learned to survive quick, calm, swallowing the part of me that wanted to defend us. Harper pretended not to notice, but her shoulders rose anyway. I promised myself, keep moving, matter what. Outside, the sun broke through a thin sheet of clouds, turning the yard into a bright green postcard. Leo insisted on watering the hydrangeas, and Harper insisted on helping him because she never wanted anyone to feel alone. Eileen brought out a tray with sandwiches and a blender cup of fruit smoothie, made with the careful sweetness she reserved for children. She still sat it closest to me. I laughed under my breath, then followed them onto the stone patio, pretending my heart wasn't racing. It happened in a blink. Leo hopped onto the bench too fast, the smoothie tipping like a slow-motion wave. I reached out, but my hand was a second late, and cold purple berry streaked down my front. The fabric clung, suddenly too thin, and my throat tightened with old panic. Leo's face crumpled, and Harper's eyes went wide, as if she could already sense what this would cost me. I forced my breathing steady, smoothing their hair, making it just an accident. Nothing more, today. I guided them back toward Eileen, then slipped through the service corridor with the speed of someone chasing a fire alarm. The staff wing smelled like laundry soap and lemon polish, nothing like the perfume of the main house. My room was small, clean, and mine. I shut the door, turned the lock, and peeled off the soaked blouse with shaking fingers. Air hit my skin, and with it the truth I hid. Pale, uneven scars that made me keep my sleeves down always, everywhere. I was halfway through swapping shirts when the handle turned. At first I thought Eileen had followed to help, but the wait in the doorway was wrong. Damian's voice started, then stopped, like he'd hit a wall. Silence poured in, heavy and absolute. I grabbed the damp blouse and pressed it to my chest, turning too fast, heart punching my ribs. His gaze landed on my shoulder and arms, not leering, not pitying, just measuring, as if my body were a message he couldn't ignore anymore. He stepped back and closed the door with a click that echoed. I stood still after he left, listening to my breath scrape in and out. Shame came first, then anger, then the old reflex to vanish before anyone could corner me again. But Harper needed stability, and Leo needed his laughter protected, and I was done running for scraps of peace. I dressed with careful hands, staring at my sleeves, knowing they could not hide me now. Damian hadn't asked. He had watched today. The click of the door stayed in my ears long after Damian's footsteps faded. I stood in the staff wing bathroom with my damp blouse balled in my hands, staring at my own reflection like it had betrayed me. My shoulders were bare, my pulse loud. I forced myself to move. I dried my skin, pulled on a clean shirt, and buttoned my cuffs to the very last notch. Long sleeves again, armor again. Then I practiced the only expression I could afford at work. Calm, grateful, invisible. When I walked back toward the kitchen, I made my breathing slow, and even the way my therapist once taught me. In for 4, hold, out for 6, repeat, until my hands stopped shaking. Leo and Harper were at the patio table, drawing dinosaurs and mermaids side by side. Harper narrated her picture with her whole face, and Leo copied her seriousness like a little mirror. Eileen hovered near them, wiping counters that didn't need wiping, but her eyes met mine for one steady second. Not pity, not questions, just permission to be okay for the next 5 minutes. I kept moving, because stopping would have meant thinking, and thinking would have meant spiraling. I poured juice, cut grapes in halves, checked for choking hazards the way single moms do on autopilot. The mansion sounded the same as always, but I heard it differently now. The soft hiss of hidden vents, the muted thud of security doors, the distant shuffle of staff who avoided eye contact. Every sound felt like it belonged to Damian. Even when he wasn't in the room, the house behaved like he might appear at any moment. He did appear. Not with a confrontation, not with anger, but with silence that watched. I felt it before I saw him, the way you feel someone step into the light behind you. He crossed the kitchen entrance, glanced once at the children, and then his gaze found my sleeves. It didn't linger on my face. It measured distance, posture, the way my shoulders tightened when he moved. I hated how my body reacted, how it told the truth without my permission. I kept my chin level and my voice soft, letting the day continue. The strangest part was that he didn't treat me like a problem in front of the kids. He crouched beside Leo, wiped a smear of purple smoothie from his cheek, and listened while Leo babbled about a shark he'd seen in a book. Damian nodded, almost smiling. Leo leaned into him without fear. Watching that, my anger got tangled with something I didn't want to name. The afternoon stretched, full of small games and quiet rules. Harper tried to teach Leo a clapping pattern. Leo tried to teach Harper how to roar. I laughed when I was supposed to. I reminded myself that this job bought groceries, rent, and school supplies, the boring things that keep a child's world from cracking. But every time Damian passed through a hallway, my skin prickled. It felt less like protection and more like being tracked, like I'd traded one kind of vigilance for another. Near the end of the day, I caught a glimpse of him through a glass corridor, standing at a window with his phone to his ear. He was still, composed, the kind of stillness that makes other people hurry. I didn't hear full sentences, only fragments carried by the air when someone opened a nearby door. My last name, a request for something thorough, the clipped cadence of orders. He didn't look toward me, but I knew he knew where I was. I stepped back into the shadow of a linen closet and waited until he walked away, my stomach sinking with the certainty that my past had just been assigned to someone else's hands. Eileen pressed a paper bag into my palm at the service exit, a few cookies wrapped in a napkin and a look that said she couldn't protect me, but she could witness me. I thanked her, then drove out through the gates as dusk softened the trees. At the first intersection, my old reflex grabbed the wheel and begged me to keep going, to disappear north, to change names again, to outrun whatever Damian had started. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. Harper was asleep in her booster seat, mouth open, lashes resting on her cheeks, trusting me to bring her home. I parked for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, and chose the only kind of courage I understood. I went back to my apartment, knowing that by morning, answers would start arriving, and I would not get to decide which truths stayed hidden. Somewhere in that mansion, a file was already forming, page by page, tonight. By the time I walked into the Mercer Island kitchen the next morning, the house already felt different. Not louder, not busier, just tighter, like someone had pulled an invisible drawstring around every hallway. Doors that were usually propped open sat shut. Voices dropped the second I turned a corner. Even the air smelled cleaner, like lemon polish covering something sour. I kept my sleeves buttoned and my face neutral, but my name moved ahead of me like a whisper on wheels. I saw him only once, crossing the foyer behind Marcus from security. A stranger in a plain navy suit, a clipped badge reading Ethan Cole. No jewelry, no expression. He carried a manila folder thick enough to bend at the corners, held like evidence. Damian wasn't with them, but the stranger's steps were confident, like he'd been invited into the part of the house that didn't forgive mistakes. I told myself his name didn't matter. Still, my stomach knew it before my brain did. Someone had come to turn my life into paper. On paper, I'm easy to file. Maya Hart, 32, dependable childcare, clean driving record, punctual, no drama, references from a daycare, and 2 families who never learned my middle name. On paper, Harper and I are just a little team, renting a small place in Seattle, paying bills, doing our best. It's the version that lets people sleep at night. It's the version I offered Damian when the agency sent me to his estate, because the truth is the kind of thing that makes employers quietly choose someone else. The truth has a face, and it's painfully ordinary. Caleb Knox could have been anyone's coworker, anyone's neighbor, the guy holding a door at the grocery store. He kept his hair neat, his voice even, his smile practiced like customer service. That was the trap. At first he called it caring, then it became checking my phone because he worried, then picking my clothes because he knew what looked right, then deciding who I could talk to because some people were a bad influence. By the time I noticed the walls, they were already built. He didn't need to shout to make me smaller. He used quiet punishments, long silences, little rules that changed without warning, and the constant suggestion that everything was my fault. I left the night I finally understood that love wasn't supposed to feel like surveillance. I packed Harper's backpack, grabbed my keys, and drove until the city lights blurred into highway dark. Later, there were forms, a restraining order that never made it to a full hearing because I moved again, a clinic visit where a nurse looked at my arms too long, a police report that reduced months of fear into neat boxes and timelines. Paperwork doesn't bleed, but I did, and that difference is the part no file can hold. Now, somewhere upstairs, those boxes were being opened again by someone who had never met Caleb and never watched me flinch at a ringing phone. I imagined paperclips and timestamps, the cold glow of a laptop, my name typed out like a headline. The humiliation hid in waves. I could handle being judged for being broke, for being a single mom, for needing help. I couldn't handle strangers handling my survival like it was inventory. Leo found me in the garden path near the hydrangeas, dragging a plastic watering can that sloshed onto his shoes. Harper trailed behind him, proudly explaining that she was the supervisor today. I watched them negotiate whose turn mattered more, and for a minute my chest loosened. Kids don't care about paperwork. They care about who shows up, who listens, who makes the world feel steady. I promised myself I would keep showing up, even if my knees were shaking under the cuff of my sleeve. That evening, the mansion's quiet tightened into something sharper. Marcus and 2 men I didn't recognize stood outside Damian's office, their shoulders squared like they were bracing for weather. The navy-suited stranger was there again, folder open on his arm, pages flipped with quick, efficient fingers. As I passed with a tray of fruit for the kids, a few words leaked through the cracked door. Caleb's name, a casino contract, shipping routes, and the name Sergei Kozlov spoken like a warning label. My blood went cold for a new reason. This wasn't just the past reaching for me. It was the past being handed a paycheck by people who dealt in leverage. And in Damian Vale's world, leverage meant war. I tucked Leo into bed later with Harper's help, because she insisted on being part of every routine. Marcus stopped me with a silent gesture. Damian was already waiting. In his office, a thick folder sat centered on his desk. Damian's office was the quiet kind of expensive, the kind that never asked permission. The door shut behind me with a soft click, and the sound felt final. No music from the kitchen, no kid footsteps, no Eileen humming, just a wide desk, dark wood, clean lines, and that folder planted in the center like a warning sign. I stayed near the chair he indicated, but I did not sit right away. My palms were damp, my sleeves felt heavier than cloth. I kept seeing the moment from yesterday, the wrong door, the pause, the way his eyes stopped being a man's eyes and became a scanner. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calm had edges. He made it clear, without ever saying it gently, that he had ordered a deeper look because Leo lived here, because strangers did not get to walk through his home and keep secrets, because every soft spot in his life had a price tag for the wrong people. I understood the logic. That was the sickest part. I had once lived with a man who called control a safety plan. He would ask where I was, who I spoke to, what I wore, and he would swear he was only protecting me. Damian's control looked cleaner, smarter, backed by cameras and trained men. But my body did not care about the difference. My body only heard one message. Someone else was deciding what I was allowed to keep. I stared at the folder and felt my throat tighten with heat. Those papers held the parts of me I had fought to lock away. Not because I was ashamed of surviving, but because I was tired of being reduced to it. I could feel anger building behind my ribs, sharp and bright, and right under it was something softer I hated, admitting, relief. Relief that when the truth showed up, it did not get laughed off. Relief that someone finally looked at my fear and treated it like evidence, not drama. I made myself breathe slow. In for 4. Hold, Out for 8. I told myself I was not a suspect. I was a mother. I was a person. Then I decided I would not leave this room with new chains, even if they were wrapped in velvet. So I laid down my conditions inside my own head first, like vows. First, the kids stayed out of it. Harper did not need to learn the taste of adult panic, and Leo did not deserve a new reason to wake up afraid. Whatever Damian and his world were doing, it would not become bedtime stories or whispered warnings in hallways. Second, I would not be kept in the dark for my own good. I had spent too long in a life where information was used like a leash. If danger moved, if Caleb shifted, if plans changed, I needed to know. Not every detail, just the truth that affected my choices. Third, my independence stayed mine. Protection could not mean permission. If I chose to leave, I would leave. If I chose to stay, it would be because I decided, not because a gate code changed or a guard stood too close. Damian listened like a man who rarely heard limits spoken to him. I watched his jaw tighten, then ease. Strategy and something more personal flickered across his face, too quick to name. He did not argue the way I expected. He recalculated. Then he told me why security owned him. He did not dress it up as tragedy. He carried it like a bruise under a tailored shirt. His wife had died and the official story had been simple. But he did not believe in simple. He believed in rivals, messages, sabotage, consequences. He believed he had failed her by assuming the rules would protect what he loved. The confession did something to the room. It turned him from the man with the folder into a man with a wound. It did not make him harmless. It made him human. And it made my anger shift into a clearer shape. I was not battling a monster. I was negotiating with someone who feared losing control as much as I feared being trapped by it. I finally sat. Not as surrender, but as agreement. We were not friends. We were not family. Yet, we were two people trying to keep children safe while a past I ran from found a new map. The door opened before I could steady my hands. Marcus Shaw stepped in, and the temperature dropped. His face was set in that professional blankness that meant bad news. The surveillance team had Caleb, then did not. A routine shift, a car swap, a signal gone dark. He was off the grid. My stomach turned hollow. Caleb was not just coming back. He was the kind of man who knew how to vanish and reappear where it hurt most. And if Damian tightened his grip to stop him, I might be the one who felt the bars. Morning tried to act normal, and for a few minutes I let it. Toast popped. The coffee machine hissed. Harper hummed while she traced circles in a spill. And Leo sat on a bar stool with a dinosaur spoon, watching a small screen by the fridge that showed the front driveway. A live camera feed, something the house had added overnight, like a new reflex. Mercer Island felt different the second I stepped into the hallway. Fresh lenses under the eaves, a second keypad on the staff wing. 2 guards I didn't recognize standing near the archway, dressed casual but moving like math. Their eyes didn't follow the kids. They followed exits, corners, my hands. I kept my sleeves pulled down even though the air was already sticky. And I kept my smile gentle because Harper copies my face when she's nervous. Eileen anchored the room with quiet kindness. No questions, no pity. I watched Harper hand Leo the bigger half of her toast, and for a heartbeat I almost believed the world was still safe. Then the camera screen shifted. A delivery van eased up to the front gate, slow and deliberate. The guard at the gate spoke into his earpiece. The van stopped. A man stepped out holding a package wrapped in pale paper. Even through the video, it looked too careful, too bright for a house that had just tightened its locks. My stomach dropped. I set down my cup and walked to the foyer, every step turning my thoughts into static. Marcus was already positioned inside the entry, between the house and the glass. He kept the delivery outside the gate line. When the paper opened, color flashed against the morning. White lilies, red roses, deep purple blooms, an extravagant bouquet with no return address, and my name on the card. Flowers. For most people, flowers mean celebration. For me, they mean the moment after. Caleb used beauty the way some men use threats, not as affection but as a tool. He would damage, then cover it in romance, so I'd doubt my fear and feel guilty for wanting to leave. He trained me to associate petals with consequences. My skin went cold. Sound narrowed, like someone had turned down the world. I could see Marcus's stance, steady and ready, but my brain replayed old patterns. Apology as control, sweetness that always demanded a price. I told myself I was safe behind thick walls and trained men. But the message wasn't the bouquet. The message was proximity. He could reach the gate. He could reach my name. He could reach the place where my daughter ate breakfast. Damian arrived with the quiet certainty that makes rooms rearrange themselves. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the flowers like they were proof. Marcus handed him the card, careful at the edges. Damian read it, and his demeanor changed so fast it felt like a door slamming. The father softness I'd seen with Leo disappeared. What replaced it was predator alert focus, controlled and cold. I didn't hear the words, but I understood the intention. Caleb was announcing himself. He was letting me know he wasn't gone. He was letting Damian know the game had started at Damian's gate. Damian made a decision without hesitation. The house snapped into motion. Radios crackled. Doors shifted into new routines. This wasn't hiding and hoping. This was removing the kids from the board while Damian hunted the hand behind the card. A safe house in the San Juan Islands. Water between us and Seattle. Fewer roads. Fewer chances. Relief hit me first. Sharp and embarrassing. Then panic followed. Because leaving meant admitting Caleb was close enough to touch us with symbols. Leaving meant packing my life in minutes. Upstairs, my hands shook as I gathered Harper's medicine, her spare inhaler, the hoodie she sleeps in, and the stuffed rabbit she still clings to on stormy nights. I added school papers because a mother thinks about tomorrow even when today is on fire. I packed extra long sleeves out of pure instinct. My suitcase used to hold one life. Now it held two, and the weight felt like responsibility made visible. When I came back down, Harper was excited in that kid way that mistakes urgency for adventure. Leo stood close to Damian, clutching his backpack, watching the adults with wide, careful eyes. I smoothed Harper's hair and tried to pour calm through my fingertips, promising myself I would not hand my fear to them. We left in a convoy of SUVs with tinted windows and disciplined spacing. Marcus drove one. Damian rode in another. I sat beside Harper, her rabbit tucked under her chin. As we pulled away, the estate shrank behind trees, turning into a dark silhouette I never wanted to need. I watched Mercer Island disappear and wondered if we were outrunning danger or escorting it. And as the road bent toward the ferry, water opening ahead like a quiet mouth, one thought kept tapping at my skull. What if Caleb already knows where we're going right this minute? The San Juan Islands greeted us with gray water and wind that tasted like salt. The ferry ramp clanged down, and Harper bounced like we had arrived at a secret camp. Leo pressed his face to the window, convinced every gull was watching us back. I smiled for them, but inside I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop, because my nervous system does not believe in vacations. The safe house sat tucked behind evergreens, modern and quiet, all glass and clean wood. Guards stood where shadows would naturally fall, hands relaxed, eyes doing math. Inside, muted radios whispered from pockets and corners. The place was beautiful in a controlled way, like calm with a lock on it. I told myself that was the point. The kids adapted in minutes. Harper found a basket of board games and declared herself in charge of choosing bedtime stories. Leo discovered a bin of toy boats and lined them up on the rug like a fleet. Their laughter bounced off the walls and made the house feel less like a bunker. Watching them, I felt my chest loosen for a second, then tighten again with the fear of losing that sound. I kept scanning anyway. Windows first, doors second. The line of sight to the driveway, the blind spots on the deck. I listened for engines, for footsteps on gravel, for a boat that lingered too long offshore. Nothing happened, and that almost made it worse. Silence can be a mask. My mind filled it with Caleb, with the way he could appear ordinary until you realized you were trapped inside his version of reality. Damian moved through the house like he owned the air. His security team took cues from him without needing words, and that kind of authority should have scared me. Instead, it steadied me, which I hated. When he stepped out for a while to coordinate things back in Seattle, my pulse jumped as if the walls had thinned. I watched one vehicle roll away and felt my instincts scream to pack again, to disappear again. Then I looked at Harper braiding a doll's hair and at Leo building a tower on the coffee table, and I forced myself to stay. I made dinner. I checked doors twice. I kept my hands busy so my thoughts would not run. Night on the island came with wind and creaking boards. After the kids finally slept, I sat in the hallway and listened to their breathing until my shoulders unclenched. Somewhere outside, a guard shifted his weight, boots soft on the porch. The sound should have reassured me. It did not. It reminded me how much I needed reassurance. The nightmare hit like a wave. No gore, no clear pictures, just the sensation of a door that would not open and a presence too close. My voice vanished. The room shrank. I woke with my hands clenched and my lungs refusing to work, convinced I had to run even though there was nowhere to run to. I pressed a palm to my chest and started the breathing pattern I learned when I was rebuilding my life. Inhale slow, Hold. Exhale longer. Repeat until the panic loosens. I counted in my head to keep the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, again. Damian appeared in the doorway, as if he had felt the shift in the house. He did not touch me. He did not crowd me. He sat on the floor a few feet away, angled toward the hall, guarding without trapping. I focused on the steadiness of him, the patience, the fact that he let me choose what happened next. When my shaking eased, I let pieces of truth surface. I admitted how control starts small, how isolation arrives disguised as care, how leaving is not dramatic but exhausting and planned. I confessed that I wear long sleeves because being seen can feel like being taken, and because my daughter deserves a mother who can function. In the quiet after, hope slid in like a cautious visitor. The kiss that followed was gentle and brief, more comfort than heat, a soft permission to believe I might not be alone forever. For a moment, the wind sounded farther away. Then Damian's phone lit up. An encrypted message flashed across the screen, and his face changed, all warmth draining into focus. His posture hardened into strategy. I did not need to read it to understand. New information had surfaced. Something about Caleb's surveillance. Something planned and documented. The storm was not outside anymore. It was already in motion, and by morning it would have a shape, a camera angle, a photo. I watched him type a reply, and I knew the next thing they would bring him would be evidence, not flowers. Morning on the island tried to pretend nothing was wrong. The ocean sat flat and gray, and the wind kept combing the cedar tops like it was just another Tuesday. Harper marched around the kitchen in my oversized hoodie, hunting for cereal, while Leo built a dock for his toy boats out of coasters. I made pancakes because normal food is a spell I know how to cast. Still, my eyes kept drifting to the cameras outside the windows, to the guard on the deck, to the faint crackle of a radio I couldn't see. Every few minutes I touched my sleeves, checking the fabric at my wrists, as if cloth could hold my past down. Damian's phone buzzed, then another device buzzed back, and the entire house seemed to inhale. Marcus appeared near the entryway, moving with that urgency that never needs volume. Other men I didn't know stepped into the living room with laptops and a case that looked heavier than it should. No one told me anything, but I felt my name traveling in their glances, the way a secret moves when it can't stay secret anymore. I kept my smile aimed at the kids, but my stomach tightened, counting how many doors stood between us. Eileen guided Harper and Leo toward the back patio with a basket of sidewalk chalk, giving me a look that said she would keep them busy, no questions asked. I stayed inside while Damian's team spread papers on the dining table like they were laying out a map. When the hard case opened, I expected weapons. Instead, Marcus slid out a manila envelope, then another, and then a stack of glossy prints from the search of Caleb's place. My throat closed before my brain caught up. I recognized the angle first, that slightly elevated distance that feels like being stared at through glass. The first photo was me at a coffee stop in Seattle, hair in a messy knot, Harper's backpack strap twisted in my fingers. The next was Leo in Damian's driveway, mid-step, sunlight on his cheeks. Dozens more followed, taped corners, dates scribbled, my life reduced to frames. I flipped through them with the careful touch you use on something contaminated. There I was at a park on Mercer Island, pushing Harper on a swing, and I could see the photographer had zoomed so close the chain links looked sharp enough to cut. Another shot caught me loading groceries. My sleeves tugged low, my face turned away. Leo appeared again in a school pickup line, holding a toy dinosaur, looking bored and safe. Seeing him that way made my vision blur. A child should never be a subject in someone's plan. I felt the sickness that says you are being owned from a distance. My skin went cold, my hearing narrowed, and I had to press my tongue to the top of my mouth to stay fully present. What shattered me wasn't only that Caleb had found me. It was the quality. The shots were crisp, level, framed with intention. Someone had used a long lens and knew how to disappear in plain sight. Caleb was many things, but he wasn't patient enough for this kind of craft. It felt rented, funded, directed. Damian's expression, when he studied the prints, told me he saw the same math. In my head I translated his calm into a message. This wasn't a jealous ex. This was a competitor using my history as a crowbar. I remembered the name Ethan had mentioned, Sergei Kozlov, the rival with shipping money and a talent for turning people into pieces. Suddenly, the photos looked like inventory. Caleb wasn't acting alone. He was being equipped and pointed like a steady flashlight in someone else's hand. I didn't hear Damian's full briefing, but I absorbed the shape of it. In his world, you don't strike a king first. You strike what the king loves. Because love makes men predictable. You map routines, mark the soft moments, learn which door opens at which time, then you take something precious and name the ransom something else. Leo's photos weren't souvenirs, they were rehearsals. And once that truth landed, I understood why Damian's control sharpened, why guards multiplied, why the island suddenly felt less like refuge and more like a staging area. Harper being in the frames was the part that made my hands curl. My daughter was not his business, not his chess piece. Yet there she was, proof that collateral was already calculated. If Kozlov wanted leverage, he didn't need my cooperation. He only needed my fear. Outside, chalk scraped the patio stones while the kids invented new rules for a game only they understood. Their laughter felt like music and a warning. I watched through the glass until my heartbeat slowed, then forced myself to step away because my brain kept drawing worst-case maps. I went into the hallway, alone, and practiced breathing again, right there. I drifted past secured doors until one sat ajar. My fingers reached for the handle, knowing trust might break behind it. The latch gave under my fingers, and the door swung inward with a hush that felt practiced. Cool air brushed my face, colder than the rest of the house, like the room was breathing on its own. Lights clicked on in neat rows. Shelves held black cases, stacked and labeled. A steel cabinet stood beside a safe bolted to the floor. On a table, everything lay arranged. Not like a hobby, but like a plan. Radios charging, binders, gloves, maps pinned flat, spare phones sleeping in docks. The silence had corners, and I realized this was where decisions became actions. I had known Damian was powerful. You don't live on Mercer Island with men who move like shadows and still call it normal. But seeing his readiness in a room this tidy made my stomach drop. It wasn't glamorous. It was grief organized into categories. It smelled faintly of metal and clean cloth, like a hospital hallway after visiting hours. My chest tightened the way it used to when Caleb checked the locks twice, then smiled like it was love. I backed up a step, because I hated how familiar control could look when it wore expensive hinges and kindness. Footsteps stopped behind me, heavy but unhurried. I turned and found Damian filling the doorway, hair still damp from sea air, expression blank in that controlled way that never wastes emotion. I waited for anger, for a lecture, for the feeling of being small. Instead, his stillness held something like permission. I understood, without him needing to spell it out, that this room was the truth he usually kept behind polished doors. He dealt in protection the way other men deal in insurance, except his policies had teeth and enemies read fine print. In his world, innocence gets people buried. I stared at the safes and felt my pulse arguing with my brain. This was the man who had held a glass of water beside my shaking hands last night, who had let me breathe at my own pace, who had kissed me like he was asking. And this was also the man built for war. My fear wanted to paint him as the next Cage. I refused. I told myself that I would not be collected like evidence, or moved like cargo. If he wanted me here, I needed truth, choices, and a door that opened both ways always. Damian didn't rush me, and that mattered. He stayed in the doorway, not blocking my exit, like he understood what that shape could do to a woman who once had to measure space for survival. I caught the meaning in his nod, in the way his hands stayed open. He was offering a deal that sounded less like custody and more like alliance. He would use his power outward, not inward. He would tell me what he knew, when he knew it, even if the truth was ugly. I didn't trust him yet, but I could feel trust becoming possible. The click of little sneakers broke the moment. Leo stood at the hallway end, one hand on the wall like he'd been sent to find us and got lost in the grown-up weather. His eyes kept bouncing between Damian and me, searching for the rule he was supposed to follow. I saw the question forming. The one children ask when they've learned adults can vanish. In my head it sounded like, will you go away again? Will the bad people take you? Will I wake up and you're not here? That question sliced deeper than any file. I swallowed hard. I knelt so my face matched his height and let my breathing slow where he could see it. I didn't give details, because kids don't need the whole storm. Just the truth that they're not alone in it. I let him know that grown-ups were handling the scary parts, that we weren't packing up and disappearing, that my leaving wasn't on the schedule. Later, while Harper colored at the kitchen table, she slid me a page with 4 stick figures holding hands, labeled in crooked letters. Damian, me, Leo, Harper. My throat ached with hope and terror mixed together quietly. Night settled, and the safe house creaked like it was trying to lull us into believing the world was wider than threats. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, listening to 2 small sets of breaths through their cracked doors, telling myself the drawing meant something real. Damian stayed down the hall until his phone lit the darkness. The screen flashed 3, and once I thought, 3 in the morning, the hour when bad news chooses you, he answered, and his posture changed in one sharp beat. Someone innocent had just been pulled into our war right now. The house was still when Damian took the call, but the air changed anyway. It was like the wind outside paused to listen. I sat up in bed with my heart already sprinting, because his shoulders had gone rigid, and in that silence I could feel the whole safe house wake without moving. Somewhere down the hall, a radio clicked softly, then died. I kept my steps quiet as I followed the glow of his phone into the kitchen, careful not to wake Harper and Leo. He didn't need to explain much for me to understand the shape of the news. Ethan's number flashed on the screen. Then a second line of encrypted text appeared, the kind of message that never brings anything good. A name landed in my mind with a sick clarity. Sophie Cole, Ethan's younger sister. The details came in fragments through Damian's controlled breathing, and the way he set his mug down like it weighed too much. Sophie had been grabbed on the east side, near Kirkland, close enough to the life I used to pretend was normal. The demand was simple, and that was what made it terrifying. Whoever had Sophie wanted one thing by evening: my exact location. I felt time narrowing into a deadline. Not Damian's money, not an apology, not a promise. Me, pinned to a map like a bright dot. My skin went cold. I tasted metal at the back of my throat. My hands shook so hard I had to press them flat on the counter just to keep from dropping into pieces. I heard my own pulse louder than the ocean. Guilt is a strange animal. It doesn't care about logic, or time, or the fact that I had been running to save my child. It just crawls into your ribs and starts chewing. I pictured Harper asleep down the hall, hair fanned over her pillow, trusting the world because she had to. I pictured Leo, small and fearless in daylight, and I felt my single mom math ignite. If I gave them my location, I risked my daughter. If I stayed hidden, Sophie might not come home. When Ethan arrived on the island, he looked like someone had taken the ground out from under him. I could see the professional part of him trying to stay upright, the part that knows procedures and probabilities. But every time his eyes blinked, the brother in him took over and the restraint cracked. I didn't need words to feel the war inside him. The rule book that says you never negotiate, and the love that begs you to break every rule. Damian's refusal came through in the way he moved, like a door locking. He wasn't going to hand me over like a package, not to Caleb, not to Kozlov, not to anyone. His control wasn't soft, but it wasn't careless either. I understood he saw trading me as inviting a bigger slaughter later, teaching our enemies that children and sisters were useful currency. And still, I could feel his gaze cutting toward me, measuring my fear, trying to anchor it before it became a stampede. I surprised myself by standing my ground. I was done being the secret everyone hid behind. I told myself this was not martyrdom. It was agency. If they wanted my location, then we would choose the location, choose the timing, choose the cameras, choose the exits. I would be the bait only if I was also part of the hook. The plan formed in my head like a straight line. Keep Caleb talking, keep him close enough for his phone to betray him, and get Sophie out while he still believed he was winning. Damian didn't let me pretend bravery was enough. His acceptance came with rules that felt harsh, but real. A tracker tucked where it couldn't be seen. A protective vest under my clothes, thin but heavy with meaning. An earpiece, a code phrase, eyes on me from 3 angles, and a hard extraction timer that no one would ignore, even if I begged. The preparations blurred into a sober montage. Batteries checked, routes rehearsed. A second vehicle positioned for a clean cutaway. My hair pulled back so no hand could use it. I kept thinking of Harper's drawing, and I kept breathing anyway. By late afternoon we were moving, the island behind us, the mainland ahead, like a bruise on the horizon. I sat in the back of an SUV between Marcus and a duffel that smelled like clean fabric and adrenaline. My phone stayed dark, because we wanted Caleb to think I was alone and desperate. Harper and Leo were safe, watched by guards who knew how to be gentle, and that was the only reason I could do this. I rehearsed the steps in my mind until they felt like prayer. Arrive, stay visible, stay calm, keep him talking long enough for Ethan's tech to trace him, and do not let fear make choices for me. The road hummed under the tires, and for the first time my terror had a shape. I knew the next stop would test. By the time we reached the waterfront, Seattle felt muted, like the city had turned the volume down. The meat spot sat behind a shuttered cannery and an old ferry yard, all rusted beams and puddled concrete. Chain link fences boxed the space into a long rectangle with clean sightlines and only a few exits. The bay slapped the pilings with steady patience. Salt air mixed with diesel and seaweed. Empty didn't mean safe. It meant planned. Damian wanted a board he could control, and I wanted one where Sophie could breathe. I wore plain jeans and a faded hoodie, the kind that disappears in a crowd. Under it, a thin vest hugged my ribs, turning every inhale into a reminder. A tracker lay flat against my skin. The earpiece was tiny, but I heard soft radio hushes, clipped and careful, like people trying not to wake a sleeping monster. Overwatch was everywhere and nowhere. I remembered the briefing as rules, not speeches. Hands visible, feet slow, stay inside the marked lane, keep Caleb talking. If I panicked, Damian would pull me out, instantly. Waiting is its own torture. I counted details instead of seconds. Floodlights, cracks, the gap between containers where someone could hide. I kept my breath in fours, the way I practiced on the island after my nightmares. The wind carried gull cries and distant traffic, normal sounds that felt fake here. My mind tried to drag me back to old rooms and old apologies. I stayed present with damp air on my face and cold rail under my palm. I was choosing while my knees shook. Caleb arrived without sirens or drama, and that was worse. A car rolled in slow with dim headlights, like it already belonged to him. He stepped out and I felt my stomach drop. Obsession had tightened him, sharpened him, scraped away the soft edges that once fooled strangers. His ordinary mask still existed, but it had cracks, and through them I sensed someone else's confidence writing in his bones. He moved like he expected backup. I didn't see another body, yet I felt unseen eyes on me, the way you feel a camera before you spot it. My pulse kept trying to sprint anyway. I forced my face into calm and held my hands where he could see them. Inside, everything in me screamed. I acted like I needed proof, like I needed reassurance, like I was still the woman he could herd. I steered the moment toward Sophie, toward whether she was alive, toward where he had her. He gave me impatience in tiny flashes, and I used it. Pressure makes people sloppy. I needed him sloppy, just long enough for our tech to bite before courage ran out. The longer he hovered, the more he leaked. He needed to feel powerful, and bragging is a kind of bleeding. I caught the meaning in his posture, the smug patience, the way he watched my eyes for flinches. New friends, the kind with money and cruelty, had taught him he was valuable. Sergei Kozlov's network sat behind him like a shadow, and Caleb loved being useful to it. He had been promised $500,000 for routines and access points, for mapping Leo's life like a delivery route, and for keeping Harper within reach as collateral if pressure was needed. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. Rage hit so fast my vision narrowed. Every instinct told me to lunge, to claw back control with my hands. I didn't. I anchored my feet and looked past him, scanning for what he didn't want me to notice. A van sat near the water, angled like it had mechanical trouble. When Caleb's attention snagged there for half a second, my blood turned to ice. Sophie was close. She was real. She was alive enough to be moved. Relief tried to make me weak, so I turned it into focus. I needed him to keep thinking he was winning. Right up until he wasn't. I kept breathing anyway. The moment the confirmation settled, the yard changed. I felt it in the radio hush, in the air tightening like a pulled thread. Shapes moved from shadows with disciplined speed. A door on the van yanked open, and a woman stumbled out, feet moving, eyes wide. Sophie. Even from a distance, I recognized survival in the way she fought to stay upright. Hands guided her away, urgent and careful. Ethan reached her and folded in, then steadied, because he had to. Caleb tried to pivot toward me, trying to grab the story back. He was taken down and restrained, fast and clean, before I could blink, as the docks creaked. When it was over, sound returned in pieces. Water, wind, my own breath. Sophie's shaking turned into steady air, and I had to look away so I wouldn't fall apart. Ethan held her like she might vanish if he blinked. Damian stayed near but not on top of me, giving me room while keeping the world contained. I expected relief to feel like victory. Instead, I felt hollow, like fear had been the only thing keeping me warm and now it was gone. In that emptiness, truth settled in. Kozlov's network didn't spend money like this to lose quietly. We saved Sophie, but we also made a move on a board I barely understood. Peace would cost something. After the cannery, the San Juan house felt too quiet, like the ocean was holding its breath with me. I moved through rooms on autopilot, rinsing cups that were already clean, folding tiny shirts that did not need folding. Relief sat in my chest, heavy as wet sand, and underneath it was a numb place where my feelings refused to line up. When I closed my eyes, the waterfront returned in flashes. Rust, wind, a van door, Sophie's unsteady steps. Then my body would crash, all at once, and I'd stare at the ceiling until dawn and count my breaths. Damian stayed close in a way that didn't demand anything from me. He made food appear, checked locks, lowered the lights when my nerves were raw, and never tried to pry my story open with a crowbar. Sometimes he sat across the room with a laptop, working in silence, and the simple fact of another adult choosing steadiness calmed my pulse. Other times he walked the perimeter with Marcus, a shadow moving along windows, and I hated how much my body tracked his footsteps. Needing him felt dangerous, but pretending I didn't felt like lying, especially with kids asleep nearby. On the second day, a therapist arrived with a canvas bag, and the kind of calm that doesn't rush you. Her name was Dr. Nora Price, and she treated me like a person, not a problem to manage. I didn't give her a neat timeline. I gave her fragments, my hands shaking after quiet, my mind replaying choices like punishment, the way flowers could turn my stomach. She helped me name what I felt without making it a lecture. She called it a normal reaction to abnormal danger, and I believed her enough to let an exhale reach my ribs. Healing didn't pause the world Damian lived in. Caleb going down under Damian's watch meant someone on Sergei Kozlov's side would demand an accounting, because in that universe, violence is a bill that gets paid even when it's deserved. I understood it in plain terms. Docks, territory, contracts, and the invisible lines men draw around money. Peace wasn't forgiveness, it was negotiation. Damian told me, without softness, that he had to return to Seattle and speak to the people who could escalate this into war. He promised he'd come back. I watched him leave and felt my stomach twist anyway. While he was gone, the kids became my weather report. Harper trailed me, brave until the wind rattled a window. Then her fingers found my sleeve. Leo asked for stories twice at bedtime and wanted the same ending, the one where everyone comes home. Their crayons spoke louder than their mouths. They drew boats and stick figures holding hands, then checked my face to see if I'd vanish. I kept my voice steady and gave them truth in pieces. We were safe, adults were handling things, and leaving was never their fault. Damian came back with exhaustion in his shoulders and a colder calm in his eyes, the kind that meant he'd paid for our breathing room. The next afternoon we returned to Mercer Island under tighter security. The main house looked unchanged from the driveway, but inside the air felt formal. Damian gathered a small circle in the dining room. Marcus, Ethan, 2 older men with authority, and an older woman who watched like she'd buried people. I understood I was being assessed, not as staff but as risk and responsibility. I kept my hands steady, thinking of Harper and Leo. Later, Damian's mother, Evelyn Vale, approached me with a calm. Her gaze didn't linger on my face. It went to my sleeves and the habit I have of pulling them down, even in warm rooms. I braced for judgment, but what I met was recognition. In the privacy of a hallway, she eased her cuff back and showed a faded line on her skin, small and real. She didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer pity. The meaning was simple. She knew what surviving looked like, and she respected it. We returned, and the air softened around my shoulders. That night, after the elders drifted away, Damian asked me to move into the main house as a partner, not staff. My chest tightened, because I wanted it, and because wanting used to be a trap. I said yes only with a condition that protected my independence. My own bank account, my own schedule, and the space to finish my community college program so I could build a career that didn't rely on him. He agreed without pushing back. That agreement felt like the real cost of peace. Not money, not territory. Choosing to be visible and belong to myself. That was my condition, and I said it like a line I would not step back over. I would finish school, build a career that could feed my daughter without anyone's permission, and I would use what I survived to help kids and parents crawl back to steady ground. Safety could not be the price tag on my freedom. If Damian wanted me in his home as a partner, he would have to accept that I stayed my own person, with my own keys, my own money, my own choices. The surprising part was how fast he agreed, as if he had been waiting for a rule that felt clean. Support, in his hands, looked less like a cage and more like practical respect. A desk appeared in a sunny corner of the kitchen, with a lamp that didn't buzz and a stack of notebooks that were mine alone. He learned my class schedule and moved meetings around it, not because I asked, but because he wanted my promise to stay real. Eileen became my quiet teammate, sliding snacks to Harper and Leo so I could read for 20 minutes without guilt. Even the guards adapted, keeping distance, letting me breathe, letting the house feel human again at last truly. The new normal wasn't dramatic. It was cereal spilled on the counter and Leo insisting his spoon was a spaceship. It was Harper practicing her spelling, while I practiced believing we could stay. At night I still checked windows, but I did it after blankets, after their breathing, after I reminded myself that love can be a routine. Damian handled bedtime with the patience of a man who learned what silence can do to kids. I watched him choose gentleness on purpose, and I started to trust our calm was something we built, not something we begged for starting today. He didn't propose with fireworks or a crowd. It happened on a Tuesday, after homework and baths, and the last hunt for a missing stuffed rabbit. The house was finally quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me. Damian sat across from me at my little desk and placed a simple ring beside my textbooks, as if it belonged there. I understood the promise behind it. Not rescue, not ownership, but a life where I could keep growing and still be held. I thought about Harper's small hand in mine, Leo's grin when Damian showed up for pickup, and I chose us. I accepted, with my spine straight. A week later, Evelyn invited us to dinner on the terrace. Just family and people who had earned trust. The air was warm, and for once I didn't reach for fabric like armor. I wore a sleeveless dress and walked out where the light could touch my arms. My scars were there, quiet lines that had once felt like a verdict. I felt eyes flicker, then soften, and I didn't shrink. I let myself be seen without explanation, because surviving is not a confession. Harper leaned against my side. Leo offered me a cookie like it was a medal, and Damian's hand rested at my back, steady, not steering ever. We did not throw a lavish wedding. We took the ferry back to the San Juan shoreline where the wind had first reminded me I was alive. Eileen came, Evelyn came, and Marcus stood far enough away to give us privacy while still being himself. The kids carried little bundles of wildflowers and took the job seriously. When Damian and I promised a life built on consent and truth, I pictured my old self in long sleeves, begging to disappear, and I felt a gentle goodbye. Evelyn hugged me after, careful of my arms, as if she was blessing my visibility. The ocean kept moving, and so did we together. I kept my condition, and the world didn't end. I studied between soccer practices and snack time, and I passed classes I once believed I was too broken to handle. By spring, I started volunteering at a community center, sitting with kids who flinched at loud voices and teaching them small ways back to their bodies. Some days I still woke up tense, and Damian still had to manage a life I didn't choose, but he never asked me to shrink to fit it. The strangest miracle was simple. I wasn't hiding anymore, and I wasn't trapped in my skin. If you had told me, on that sticky Seattle morning, that the sleeve I never rolled up would become the part of me I stopped apologizing for, I would have laughed. Back then, being seen meant danger. Now being seen means I get to choose who stands beside me when life gets messy. My scars did not turn into beauty, and they did not disappear, but they stopped being my shame. Harper and Leo healed something in me by needing me to stay, and Damian learned that protection only counts when it comes with agency. If this story touched you, like, share, and comment. What does safety mean to you?